Happy Summerisle days. Happy days. And the Wickerman. The old ways aren't always better.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. Are you ready for a deep dive into two, well, let's just say surprising pop culture picks?
I do love a good surprise. What have we got today?
Okay, so, get this. Happy Days, that classic sitcom, all poodle skirts and jukeboxes.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. The 1950s, a simpler time.
Right. And for our second source, we're heading to a remote island with The Wickerman, a cult classic horror film, if I ever saw one.
Now that's a fascinating pairing. Sunshine and shadows. What's the connection?
That's what we're going to find out. We've got the Wikipedia entry on Happy Days, and, hold on. Here it is, a whole research paper on The Wickerman's legacy.
Okay, so we're going deep. Deep cuts, deep dives, I like it.
We're going to uncover how these two totally different works, each reflecting their own time, still resonate with us. You game?
Absolutely, let's dive in.
Perfect. Now, Happy Days might seem like all feel-good nostalgia on the surface, but it wasn't an instant hit.
Oh, I'm surprised everyone loves a little escapism, right?
You'd think, but when it premiered back in '74, the reviews were actually kind of mixed.
Interesting. So what changed?
Well, I think it's fair to say one character in particular really turned things around.
Let me guess. Fonzie.
Bingo. That leather jacket and that motorcycle, he became cool in the '70s.
He tapped into something that was already there, don't you think? That yearning for a rebel, an anti-hero.
Absolutely. But there's another shift that happened around the same time that I think is really interesting. Happy Days switched from being shot with a single camera to using multiple cameras.
Oh, wow, you're right. That's a big change, production-wise. And it reflects a bigger trend in sitcoms, too. More energy, a faster pace, that laugh track really popping.
Yeah, and I think that style really fit the energy of the show and I guess what audiences were looking for at that time. And speaking of fitting in, Happy Days actually spawned some other huge EE hits.
Oh, like Gar.
Well, there was Laverne and Shirley, of course, and then a little later on, Merc and Mindy.
You're right. I almost forgot those were spin-offs. The power of a good formula, I guess. Speaking of formulas, I bet some people listening are wondering about a particular phrase. A not-so-happy Happy Days moment.
Oh, man, you're talking about jumping the shark.
Tell me, the one and only. Tell me, how does a phrase like that come from a show about milkshakes and sock hops?
I know, it's kind of wild, isn't it? It all comes down to one, let's say, memorable episode. Picture this. Fonzie, our guy, the epitome of cool.
Yeah.
On water skis.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Water skis. That tracks. It's the 70s. Everyone's trying to outdo each other with stunts.
Right. But here's the kicker. He's not just skiing. He's jumping over a shark.
He jumped the shark. Literally.
Literally. And just like that, jumping the shark was born. The phrase, I mean.
It's amazing how these things take hold, isn't it? One moment on TV and bam, it's part of our vocabulary.
It's kind of poetic in a weird way. That episode became a symbol for when a show, well, maybe loses its way a little, trying too hard, you know?
Oh, I see. It's like the writer said, hold my beer, watch this, and things were never quite the same.
Precisely. It's become this universal signifier for a decline in quality. And not just in TV shows either.
You're right. Books, movies, music, even entire careers, you could say.
Exactly. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
But even with that whole jumping the shark thing, you can't deny Happy Days has had a lasting impact. Just look at all the merchandising lawsuits. Even now, all these years later, people are still fighting over those characters.
Which speaks volumes, really, about the power of nostalgia. Those images, that yearning for a simpler time. It's potent stuff. Makes you wonder about that impulse, doesn't it? That need to revisit the past.
It's a great point, and one that might lead us to our other pop culture pick. Ready for a change of scenery. Because we're leaving the sunny streets of Milwaukee and heading to a very different island.
Oh, this is where we get to the Wickerman. Right. Talk about a shift from milkshakes to, well, something a little darker.
You could say that. And yet, both Happy Days and The Wickerman, in their own way, tap into this idea of unease with change.
Yeah.
Happy Days offered this escape to a romanticized past, a simpler time.
Right. But The Wickerman takes us headfirst into those anxieties about the unknown. Tradition versus modernity, faith versus paganism. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. And what's interesting is how both of these works, despite being completely different in terms of genre, both kind of snuck up on audiences.
You mean they weren't instant hits? I know Happy Days took a while to find its groove, but what about The Wickerman? It's considered a classic now, but did people not get it at first?
It wasn't a huge box office success initially, but it found its people, you know. gained this whole cult following that's still going strong. And part of that is the air of mystery surrounding it. There are all these different cuts, different restorations. It's like its own little puzzle.
Oh, how fascinating. So it's almost like the film itself reflects that theme of shifting perspectives, those layers of interpretation.
Totally. And speaking of layers, we can't talk about The Wicker Man without mentioning Christopher Lee. I mean, the guy was a legend. Dracula, Frankenstein's monster,
Yeah.
you name it, he played it.
Right, a true icon of horror. And he actually considered The Wicker Man to be his best work, did you know? Which, coming from him, is quite a statement.
Seriously. What do you think drew him to that project in particular?
Well, knowing Christopher Lee, I think he was drawn to the complexity of it. I mean, The Wicker Man isn't just some cheap thrill. It's a film that makes you think, makes you question. You've got themes of faith, doubt, the pull of tradition, and the danger of blind belief all wrapped up in this unsettling folk horror package.
And the way they use those traditional folk songs, those rituals, it's genuinely creepy. So much more effective than just throwing a jump scare at you, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's that slow build, the atmosphere that gets under your skin. You're drawn into this world, this island community, where the lines between what's real and what's imagined start to blur.
It's brilliant and terrifying. You
Yeah.
never really know who to trust or what's going to happen next. And, it just occurred to me there's this weird parallel between The Wicker Man and those inconsistencies we were talking about with Happy Days.
You mean like that whole Chuck Cunningham thing? The disappearing brother?
Exactly.
John Ritter
It's like,
still did okay. Three's Company over Happy Days every day of the week.
even these hugely popular, seemingly straightforward pieces of pop culture have these little mysteries, these quirks that make you scratch your head.
I love that. It's a good reminder that nothing is ever as simple as it seems, especially when you're talking about something that's been reworked and reinterpreted over the years, like The Wicker Man with all its different versions.
It's like trying to piece together a puzzle, isn't it? Trying to figure out the real version, the true intent.
And in a way, that mystery just adds to the appeal. It keeps people talking, debating,
Yeah.
keeps those deep dives going, am I right?
You're totally right. And it reminds us that even with entertainment, there's always something more going on behind the scenes, whether it's creative differences, studio meddling, or just the limits of what they could do back then.
Yeah.
It all plays a part.
And I think that awareness that there's more to the story than what we see on the surface, it makes us more active viewers, more critical thinkers.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Happy Days and The Wicker Man, what's the takeaway for you? I mean, we've covered everything from nostalgia to cultural anxieties, the evolution of TV and film, even a little bit of legal drama.
You know, what strikes me the most is how both of these works, in their own unique ways, get at this very human need to make sense of the world around us. We crave comfort, we long for a sense of belonging, and those desires manifest in all sorts of ways.
It's like they're two sides of the same coin, aren't they? Happy Days gives us that warm, fuzzy feeling of the past, while The Wicker Man forces us to confront the darker side of tradition, the anxieties that come with change and the unknown.
And the best part is, they both spark these really interesting conversations. They make us think critically about the media we consume and the messages we're taking in.
We started this deep dive with what seemed like a pretty odd couple, a feel-good sitcom and a cult classic horror film. But I think we've shown that there are always connections to be made, even in the most unexpected places.
Exactly. So the next time you're watching a movie, listening to a song, even just flipping through a magazine, take a second to dig a little deeper. You never know what you might find.
And who knows? Maybe it'll inspire your next deep dive. Until next time, folks.